When Kevin Cergol-Plotkin enrolled in Duke Law in 2017, little did he know that years later, as a partner at Mission Law, he'd be representing some of the most notorious startups in Silicon Valley. You may know him as Cluely's lawyer, but behind all that, Kevin's a multifaceted person and also a former founder himself. In this episode, we dive into his take on the role that content plays in 2026, but more importantly, the things that founders should watch out for if they don't want to run in trouble with the law with their content. This is honestly a must-watch for everyone, but let's get right into the episode. Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Can you just give us a quick background on who you are, where you're from, and what you're working on?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Kevin Cergol-Plotkin. I'm an attorney at Mission Law, and I help make legal easy for early stage startup companies. We've been operating for about 5 years. I started my career at some of the larger, big startup law firms, got a ton of great experience, and decided to join Mission Law. I recently became a partner at the firm, and I'm really excited about our future.
When did you decide you wanted to become a lawyer?
So I was about 7 years old, and my dad he was a detective for like 30 years. And his outfit for work one day was a little bit different. Suit on, and he looked really nice. I'm like, "Oh, where are you going?" He tells me he's going to court. Well, that sounds interesting. He had to go out the door, so we talked for like 2 minutes. Then I was so stoked to see him come home that day. I'm like, all right, what is this court thing? And he gets home and he tells me all about it. And there were these characters in there called lawyers. And I was like, that's interesting. Like they go and they argue and they help like make important things happen. And then I got a little bit older and went through like rebellious teenage stage. And then it turned into like, well, I want to be a lawyer because I want to be like a criminal defense attorney, and I'm going to fight against my dad. And that went away very quickly. Because around the same time, I actually started my first business. I was a 3-sport athlete, so I had no time to do like a traditional after-school job. So me and my buddy, we bought a lawnmower together, and we basically went around all the neighbors and we're handing out flyers of lemon. We're like, hey, please let us cut the lawn. And that was the first time I made like my first dollar from something that I was behind, and it was kind of addicting. So I ended up going to undergrad at Ohio State, go Buckeyes. And I studied business there. That was kind of inspired by the whole unknowing thing. And I realized that it's actually possible to marry the two things and be a business lawyer. So I knew that was what I wanted to do, but I didn't know much about startups. And then, so I actually started my first year of law school, and I honestly hated it. It was terrible. I was mostly taking classes that had to do with litigation and reading like opinions written by judges, which no issue if that's your thing, but it's not my thing. And I thought it was so boring, and I had like an existential crisis. I'm like, what am I doing here? Why am I being a lawyer? And then very, very fortunately got introduced to this program at Duke called the Startup Ventures Clinic. The Startup Ventures Clinic at Duke, which if you're an entrepreneur at Duke, you should do that. You basically go as an entrepreneur, you go to Duke and you say, hey, I'm working on this company. I need some basic legal help. And what I was able to do as a student was help my peers start companies with the supervision of like an actual attorney, because I was just a law student at the time. And it was like a night and day experience for me, where I went from like law school is awful to I see the light. This is the thing I need to do with my career. I was one of the only students to do that clinic twice. And I believe I also like informally helped out afterwards. I just enjoyed it so much. I think it's really, really such a privilege to be trusted with someone's life's work. It's so cool to get that phone call from a client and they're like, hey, I have this really important, really exciting thing going on. And to be the person that is relied on to give that advice and to help guide it with that moment is like such an awesome privilege. And I love it. So I haven't looked back since I got that first taste in law school and decided I needed to be a startup lawyer.
In that program, it sounds like an awesome program at Duke and the impact you've made. Why do students need that in companies, need that legal protection? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, we don't have revenue, or, we just have a little bit of revenue. Why do they need a lawyer?
So I think that at the early stages, there's a decent argument to be made that you do not need like a full legal team. And actually, I often encourage very, very early stage people. Like I have people reach out to me, and like I want to be as helpful to as many people as I possibly can. And I had people reach out that are like, hey, I have like $50. I'm a college student. I need you to be my lawyer. I'm like, this is not going to work out. We're going to be financially misaligned, and our firm is generally like much lower cost than some of the legacy law firms, but still, there are a lot of early stage entrepreneurs that do not want to pay like significant amounts for a full-time attorney or outside general counsel, just basically what I am. So often they'll use programs like those free university clinics. Like the Duke clinic that I did was free. There's also like basic DIY incorporation platforms like Stripe Atlas. This is another platform called Quirky. The basic thing you want to get right early is, as a company, did we properly issue our stock? And do we actually own our intellectual property? Because if you are a technology startup and you don't own your IP, what are you? Generally, these are businesses that have like little to no revenue, and they are raising often millions of dollars because of potential and intellectual property that either has been built or will be built. And often where you see issues is, an early stage company might have people work on a thing together in like an informal manner. They'll work on it for a while and things happen. Like founders are people, you have rifts that form between those people, and you could have one split off, and the person that split off maybe developed a ton of key IP. Well, that company is going to struggle. So the purpose of basically working with legal, or at least going through the legal motions early, is just to make sure that you are set up to generally raise money and be able to succeed moving forward. I think a lot of like there's a ton of stuff you can optimize for. Like basically any company can have infinite legal work. I think a lot of my job is figuring out like how heavy-handed do you want to be for an early stage company? Like you could advise on a list of 100 things that you should probably do. But I do also think there's a practical element of, as a startup company that has not a ton of money, here's the punch list of things you should really worry about. And like equity and IP tend to be two of the most important things.
Interesting. It's almost like the Pareto principle of what is, the least amount of work that you can do for that to get the most value. Like I'd say like 20%, 80% of results. And that's essentially what you're doing for startups.
I would say at the earliest stages, yes. As you get further along, there ends up being significantly more work that goes into it. I think for my companies that have raised multiple rounds of capital, like we're definitely more heavily involved. But often, like you're working with a company that's just getting started. They basically want to form and make sure they own their IP, and then move forward, develop, try to find product market fit. Like we'll often create companies, do like a few basic consultations with founders, and then they'll disappear for 3 months, and then they'll come back. They're like, "Oh, things are going great. We're raising $5 million." It's like, "Oh, that's awesome." And then we'll help with like the very complex financing rounds that startups generally are entering into across from like venture capital firms, for example. So it varies based on the age of the company, but yeah, early stage does tend to be much lighter touch.
Can we talk a little bit about mission law? So, you developed the interest in startups in law school, but then how did you eventually come to know about mission law and obviously join the firm?
Yeah, so right out of law school, I worked at a big law firm called Latham and Watkins. Latham and Watkins, I believe, is the biggest, if not one of the biggest law firms in the world. It was awesome. I had a ton of like I did all sorts of work there. I did some like, mergers and acquisitions. I helped take a couple of companies public, and I did a fair bit of startup work as well. And it was very cool to do such like a wide variety of things at that first year of my career. But I knew that I wanted to get back into a practice that was more or less solely dedicated to like the Silicon Valley startup ecosystem. Silicon Valley meaning like not necessarily the place, but like the ethos, because New York is also now having a pretty killer startup scene. But then I went to Fenwick. Fenwick and West is another like startup law firm. Had a really, really, really awesome time there. I learned a ton. I worked with a lot of excellent partners, worked on some really like high flying clients and also some small clients that ended up becoming really good friends. But ultimately for me, like I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. Like back since the first like dollar I made mowing lawns. In law school, I created like a running app, which was a ton of fun. I felt that as awesome as the big firms can be, I didn't feel like I had the agency. There's your first Silicon Valley buzzword of the day. I'll try to keep it to a minimum. I didn't feel like I had the agency to kind of be entrepreneurial. I was able to work on a lot of cool transactions, and I learned a ton. I love my colleagues, but I think what can be difficult at the large firms is there are so many layers of people, and like as a younger to mid-level attorney, like you're not getting a lot of the interactions with clients. You're certainly not going out and like developing your own reputation, your own like book of business, for example. So I wanted to do the smaller firm life because I was like, I actually really, really enjoy being a lawyer, but I don't know that this is the career path for me in the long term. So Mission Law was started about, I think at this point, like 5 years ago. It was started by my partner, Tony. Tony was one of the first legal hires at Atrium, which y'all are probably too young for, but Atrium was like a really interesting legal tech play. It was started actually by Justin Kahn, like the Twitch guy. But yeah, yeah. Which like it was an interesting experiment. It was basically the core thesis was, a lot of legal, particularly as it relates to startups, can and should be tech driven. That business unfortunately did not work out. But in the aftermath of Atrium, Tony started Mission Law. And the core thesis was the same, except the main difference was this was not like Atrium raised, I don't remember the exact figures, but a lot of venture capital. That was not our model. Our model was we want to build technology. We want to have a technology driven law firm, but it will not be done at like the breakneck speed of a company that's raising tens of millions of dollars. It has like very intense VC expectations. It allows us to be like very thorough in our like pushing in new products. But I will say like the firm has always been pretty tech forward. And I think at this point, like we have a pretty good client facing app that our clients are like generally pretty happy with. It leads to us being faster. Like that is the practical output of having a good technology based law firm is our clients love how fast we're able to respond and get work done for them. And a big reason we're able to do that is like we're able to automate a lot of like lower level work and allow the attorneys to focus on like the really like more difficult things. The firm has been expanding quite a bit over the last like year and a half. I ended up joining because Tony and I actually both went to Duke. Someone that I knew from an earlier job had actually interned at Mission Law. And I reached out to him and was like, hey, do you have a good experience there? Can you introduce me to Tony? And I had a quick follow with Tony and I realized like, oh, we're very, very similar in our like views on how law should be practiced. And it went from like an informational, like virtual coffee chat type thing to Ned, we should go to the park like next week. And we walk around, I think a Lake Chabot, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, over by, like over on the other side of the bay in San Francisco for like 4 hours. And by the end of that conversation, we're like, all right, let's work together. I'm ready to go. So I joined the firm like 2.5 years ago. And it's been such a good experience. I think the biggest thing for me has just been like the flexibility to kind of spread my wings a little bit. And I think that as a former founder, I tend to connect with founders pretty well because I've been in their shoes. I've been on like a peanut butter and jelly diet, and I get it. So I think that trying to like being at a place where I was able to have like a bit more agency was really good for me because I was now able to develop like a bunch of client relationships. I was able to feel like a lot more meaning in my work. And my hope anyway is that I feel a lot of joy and meaning from my work, and I hope that that's reflected in my client work. And it seems that my clients do feel that I actually care about them and do know that I actually care about them. I don't think it's as easy to do that at a large firm when there are so many layers of like bureaucracy on top of you.
That's so wholesome. And it's interesting that you also have this high level of touch and connection with your clients, but you also have an app that makes you stand out to get faster response times and, better service, which you would think does, or at least some people would think do the opposite.
I would argue that they actually enable one another because if I'm able to automate drafting an employee offer letter or like a 5-page NDA, for example, that frees up time to pick up the phone and say, hey, I know you were meeting with XYZ engineer today. How'd that conversation go? Are we going to end up hiring this person? It allows me to have more time to check in and do a strategy call to see how someone's fundraise is going. I think by freeing yourself as a lawyer from some grunt work, you have more time to do things that are more enjoyable. And also like probably more meaningful to the client.
Can you tell us more about this app that Mission built to and what, and like kind of how it's different from big law firms too? Because Matt and I are not familiar with big law.
Yeah. So I will say like disclaimer, I'm not familiar now with like the offerings of every single big law firm. I will say this is speaking in generalities. So my view and our view as a firm is that a very large portion of legal as it relates to startups can be automated. That doesn't mean, oh yeah, like you're going to submit a request on our app and the lawyer's never going to look at it. But attorneys billing on a per hour basis, it's not the most efficient thing in the world to send back and forth like 10 emails to one another about, oh, like what's the person's name? What's their email address? And going back and forth on like how your comp will be structured. So I'm going over like an offer letter example for now. So what we built is basically an app that you log on as a startup and you will see like basic info about your company. And that came from getting feedback from users around like what things are you often looking for? Like we analyze our emails. Oh, we're always being asked for the EIN document, the employer identification number document. So we put like a button on the app. Okay, I need my EIN. You click it and you get your EIN. And basically our thesis is that you can automate a lot. And we tried to go top down and pick like the 5 or 10 most common things that startups are asking us for. And then we felt like, can we build process around that? Sometimes the answer is no. I think there's a lot of stuff in the law that is really variable. Like for example, like if you're negotiating a contract, no negotiation is the same. That could take 10 minutes. It could take 10 hours. You could be negotiating one provision. You could be negotiating the entire document. So things like that tend to be harder to automate, but there's some things where like, okay, I'm hiring a consultant. Most people are doing more or less the exact same thing every time there. There are a handful of variables that need to be taken care of. We help put together the document for them using like a very thorough questionnaire that basically thinks through like every edge case that's going to potentially derail a startup if it's done wrong. And then once we get the submission, we also pass it on the back end to like an equity tracker. So like, let's say you're granting someone equity, we track the equity that the person is going to get. And then later down the line, when the company is going to actually issue that equity, the company's board needs to approve it. The board, like the actual document that the board uses to approve that equity is also more or less automatically created. It does not mean that we're not in the loop, we're not involved, but it makes our job much easier to not be starting from scratch. And we're able to pass that cost savings on to the client, particularly like I mentioned before, early stage startups can be quite cost sensitive. So we see it as a win-win. We can save on cost. We can free up attorney time to work on more difficult work. It tends to help both parties.
And your typical client, is that like very early stage or like, you mentioned you work with clients that have raised multiple rounds of funding. So like, what does the typical mission law client look like?
So I say it's probably changed over the last year. And I think it varies by partner. I've kind of ended up falling into this position where I actually am kind of like Gen Z startup lawyer now. Like I feel like at this point in my career, I don't know, my average client is definitely younger than 25. That I can say for certain. By definition, those clients are not going to have raised all that many rounds because like, okay, unless you're starting a company at like 14, which like actually does happen. It's kind of crazy. But if you're starting a company like either fresh out of school or you dropped out of school, like you're still fairly young in the journey. So I'd say my average client has probably raised 1 to 2 rounds of funding. They've done what's called like a priced round, which means, so I'm not sure how familiar you are with like how companies in Silicon Valley are typically funded, but generally speaking, the first round is done through, I guess, an instrument called a simple agreement for future equity. It's the SAFE. Really, really, really overgeneralizing, but it's basically like an IOU for future equity that has a value of the company pegged to it. And the price round is you're actually purchasing stock. But price rounds tend to be significantly more complicated or require a lot more legal support. The whole underlying concept of the SAFE is like founders can more or less do it on their own with like light touch legal support. So average client has done usually 1 SAFE round. Maybe they've raised the price round, or often I get a phone call of, hey, I've raised the SAFE round. I'm looking to raise a price round. I have a term sheet, which is like when the VC says, here are the terms. I'd like to offer you financing. I need a lawyer. So yeah, it's usually they've raised a few rounds of funding and then are continuing to try to usually raise more money. I also do have a handful of clients that are like really late stage. And we actually brought in a client that was like Series D yesterday. And we have clients that have been around for a bit longer. Like clients that started with the firm 5 years ago have raised more money than clients that started a year ago, for example.
Yeah. What are there any significant differences between, your younger, less than age 25 clients versus the more established like Series D guy who's probably a little bit older?
So I'll try to take this away from legal for a bit because I think that's like where the more interesting differences are. The way that I communicate with Gen Z clients is completely different from the way that I communicate with my later stage, typically like older. By older, I mean like 25. My older clients, I've found that the Gen Z clients tend to prefer to communicate through text, it's a lot more informal. I don't need to write like super polished emails for like basic stuff. Obviously, like there are times when like the matter is really serious and it requires a a stern, like professional tone. But a lot of our communication is just very ad hoc. I'm in all sorts of like text chats with friends. I'm in like signal chats with clients. What I was going to say, the conversations do often feel more like conversations with friends, which to me is a point of pride because that means that my clients are comfortable with me. I think that this is being accessible. Like I grew up in a prime blue collar family. Like I didn't know a bunch of lawyers. That wasn't a thing for me. I knew like two, and they all lived in Manhattan, and they were great. But I got to see them like once or twice a year, and I was always like in awe of them. So they had the big fancy office, and to me they like walked on water, and I thought that was cool. But at the same time, like when I got to law school in particular, like I showed up at Duke, I felt like I snuck into the country club. It was so strange to see like students whose parents were like super famous and like all like I love my Duke classmates. It was awesome. I met my wife at Duke. It was just like it was kind of like a culture shock for me. And I think that a lot of the like really polished attorney communication that I think lawyers often get kind of negged for might come natural to your average law student, but it's actually deeply unnatural to me. Like so I think that when I communicate with my younger clients, I'm able to just kind of be myself. And I think it's great for both parties. Like I don't feel like I'm not like faking who I am. And for them, I think they feel comfortable with me, which leads to honesty, which leads to like clean communication. They don't feel that they need to dress everything up to ask me a question. And like that's how I want it. I want my clients to be comfortable with me. I want my clients to feel like they can tell me what's going on so that I can give them like a real answer. If you lie to your lawyer, it's like lying to your doctor, right? If you have like you have cane, but you don't want to share that with your doctor, right, your medical outcome is not going to be as good. If you're not comfortable with your attorney and you're not going to share the full details of whatever situation you're going through, it's going to come back to bite you. It's simple. Like it will come back. It's just a matter of when.
You articulated that so well. You have clearly made a viral post about you as the company's lawyer.
Yes. Share too much about individual clients, but I will say Roy and Neil have been wonderful people to work with. I think they're incredibly generous, smart, hardworking. Those guys are awesome. The whole like lead up to that was such a fascinating experience to me because I'm like quiet. And like and you guys would probably get mad at me for this, but my social media presence is like it's not the best and it's okay. Like we can all admit that. And when we wrapped up their financing round, I talked to Roy and like we were in the office together and he like mentioned me. He's like, oh, like I want to make a Twitter post about you. Like, thank you so much for all the help. And I was like, oh, okay, that's really cool. But I didn't think it was going to turn to like this whole thing. And the day that it happened, it's like I had like a very like lightly used Twitter and like I'm on LinkedIn at the time. I didn't have like a ton of followers. He posts like the LinkedIn post, he posts the tweet. And it was the craziest thing. I was walking around Golden Gate Park with my wife in San Francisco, and my phone felt like an electric toothbrush. Like it was just nonstop buzzing. I had friends of friends texting me and my wife, like, wait, I didn't know you represent these guys. And it was a really interesting moment just to see like how powerful virality can be. And the like how it impacted the business. Like this was a Sunday. And I remember doing like over by like a bench. And we had to have like an emergency firm meeting on a Sunday because we were getting so much inbound that like we're a small shop. Like it's our firm is entirely ex big law attorneys that are specialists in startup work. And we basically needed to decide as a firm, like, okay, we can take on literally like 100 clients today if we want, but we probably shouldn't do that. We're actually gonna need to tell a lot of people no. And I think we probably gave some of our competitors some business that day, which is totally fine. I want people to get good legal support. And we made a decision to be like, okay, we're going to stop taking clients at a certain point. I won't go through like the specific numbers, but the bet that we made, and I think it was the correct one. I think it's paid off is, if we only take on X clients that are really like doing well, they're probably going to raise capital. We meet with them and we think that they're going to be good to work with business today, but we are helping to set the firm up for longer term success. So we took on like not small, but a smaller group of clients than we could have from that whole viral push. And then like right away, we helped a bunch of them raise money. We've been very busy. It's been there was of course that moment, and also like the firm had a lot of tailwinds beforehand, and this like was kind of the icing on the cake. So we've been super busy. We've been doing a ton of work, and a lot of the clients that we brought in that initial push from like the post, they ended up actually enjoying working with us so much that they've sent us a ton of business. So a lot of law firm growth it's mostly organic, and I think that the biggest asset that you have as a law firm is a good reputation. And we were very conscious of like, we need to keep that. We didn't like that moment wouldn't have happened if we didn't care a ton about our like quality of work. And we did not want to try to, oh, we got to cash in all of our chips. So I want to be running this business for 20 years. You don't want to totally blow the lid off of it and take on more work than you can. Like the market right now is also just insane. But we've been so busy for a while that we had a brief moment where we stopped taking clients because we needed to shore up recruiting. So I can't say too much about it today, but where the firm's going to be expanding, we have a couple of really exciting hires joining the team. So we are definitely back open for business. We're trying to grow much more quickly now, and we're really, really excited about this upcoming year. I think the last 6 months for this year, every month has been our best month. It's been so fun, and we're hoping next year continues in the same direction.
Thank you. When after this post, really transforms your business in a lot of ways, did it make you want to post on social media more, or anyone else at Mission Law, or tune up your LinkedIn profile?
It did a bit. I will freely admit that I probably suffer from what big time LinkedIn people probably often criticize is like, it feels sometimes uncomfortable to make posts, particularly on platforms like LinkedIn. The way I've historically thought about LinkedIn as a professional, and generally still the way that I think about it. And we maybe after the pod we talk more about the philosophy behind this, but I want to basically have my profile be like kind of a canvas of the type of work that I can do. I want my prospective clients, like if you are a startup founder, I want you to go onto my page and see aspirationally, I can be the type of client that I want to be while working with Kevin. So for example, when a client raises like a price round, I always want to share. And the tough thing is, as a lawyer, we have very, very important duties of confidentiality to our clients. Like I share a fraction of the deals that I actually do, because most of the time a client will actually keep it quiet. The like announcements of fundraising, it's become a bigger thing, but I still say it's not the default. So I won't share it unless a client is like open to sharing, and usually like, they'll share it themselves. They'll see the video, I'll be like, hey, can I share this too? And like they're always generally supportive. I want the client to be able to look onto my page and be like, okay, Kevin can do my big financing across from insert like tier 1 venture firm here. You can help the firm, or you can help the company exit. And then for the more mundane stuff, you kind of have to assume that they are going to post congratulations to like Acme Inc. on hiring like Susie Smith as a entry-level software engineer. Like that would be stupid. So our website tends to have more of those details, but I do kind of think of it as a canvas. I thought about doing like some sort of either like a Substack or posting more content about the law related to startups on LinkedIn. And I think it's something that I'm definitely open to doing in the future. But I think with like the intent over the past like 6 months of like growing sustainably, I think I was intentionally kind of holding back from doing some of that stuff.
That makes sense. How would be, I mean, if our UMass stage really focused on delivering the most value for my current clients, and then thinking in making sure my LinkedIn is more of a, website, resume that's polished, shown proof. And then after, now that you're growing the firm a little bit more, starting to create that outbound motion, and that's not as reactive to potential clients seeing and saying, okay, right, here's what we've done.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's something that's on our roadmap for this upcoming year. We still have never spent a dime in marketing. I don't really think we've run like really any outbound. It's probably like you guys probably eviscerate me for this, and I appreciate if we don't do that. But it's very much like if you look at my LinkedIn, you look at Tony's LinkedIn, my other partner Suman's LinkedIn, like we have historically not been great about creating content. It's So we haven't really done like that outbound motion. It's something that I think next year we're going to be more intentional about as the firm continues to grow. And it's something I'm excited about doing because I've always seen people that post content like that. And I think like you kind of get this imposter syndrome sometimes, right? Where like, oh, that can't be me. Oh, but I think as I've gotten more senior in my career, you'll see things that people post and it's like, I absolutely could have just written that post too. I think part of it's just overcoming like the mental block of who wants to hear what I have to say, you know?
I totally agree. Like, I'm sure after working with Roy, you realize that he's a person just like us and that, more confidence to make content because you see that there's not like necessarily something that like, a school or some metric you need to make content.
I agree. I do think some people have more of an eye for it than others. But in general, yes, I do.
100%. I this Roy is it's unique case who's absolutely crushing it and is really gifted at social media for sure.
Yeah, I mean, just piggybacking off of that, I feel like a very unique angle almost because of what you were saying earlier around, okay, like the typical law school student, the way that they think or talk or act, and maybe like typical big law lawyer, right? Of going to talk to like a 22-year-old CEO, disconnect there, right? Whereas it feels like you're able to close that gap with some of your younger clients a lot easier. And I could see that manifesting also in like potentially the future content that you're putting out as well, where you're maybe breaking down some common questions that a lot of founders will have in their early stage, but doing it and packaging it in a way that is appealing to them, right? So yeah, 100%, like super excited to see if you guys do start posting content.
Permission to take that idea. That sounds great.
Absolutely. Permission to steal it right here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, it's kind of funny. Like my best friends from law school are like very. I mean, including like my spouse, like are very like more traditional attorneys. And then I will be at a wedding or like a law school reunion or whatnot, and we'll get to talking, and I'll hear what they're doing every day. And they're like, wait, so what's your job? I'm like, "It's nothing. Like, or they'll hear how I talk to my clients on the phone, and I was like, who was that? I'm like, oh, it's actually CEO of so and so. And yeah, that is true. I definitely have a unique perspective there, and I think that's maybe people would want to hear about it more. So okay, I'll do it. I'm in.
You heard it here first.
One question that might be a good start to the series is why when you're raising money from a tier 1 BC, what are you helping the client with? Like, are you helping with negotiations or I see or not? Because we have really
It depends. I think that's oftentimes when I'm working with, like, if a client that I've been working with for a long time is going to be raising, it tends to be like it's like complex, but not complicated. Like, I think startup priced rounds, meaning like when we went up with this earlier, but like when you actually are selling stock, not safes, you're selling actual shares to an investor. The standard set of documents that are used are, I don't know, like in total, like a few hundred pages long. How many of these at this point? That the actual process is typically not all that mentally taxing, but it is very complex. But usually, if I've been working with you for a while, we just dive right into that. Sometimes, though, I've had clients that have come to me from either like referrals or, they hadn't had a lawyer, but they've been, I mean, this happened with Tanya, no lawyer, no legal team. We formed on Stripe Atlas or Quirky or something like that, which are great platforms. And 2 years later, we've been building this business and I'm ready to raise money. And I have a term sheet from an investor. And my friend said that I should work with you, or like I found you on LinkedIn or whatnot. And those tend to be a little bit more difficult because I spend the first bit of this just doing like a ton of cleanup, because when you're raising money, you create what's called like a data root. Historically, it used to literally a room like this, and it would be full of boxes and like all the company's legal files. And now it's all digital, fortunately, but it's basically like a canvas of the company's legal history. If you've been working, and this is the sell for working with an attorney early, if you can do it. If you've been working with an attorney since day one, who knows what they're doing, generally speaking, your legal is going to be pretty clean. So long as you're like communicative with your lawyer, it should not be terribly difficult for you to raise your first pitch round. Investors will ask for generally the same set of items in diligence. And if you've been working with us for a while, we basically just say, we'll do like a quick scan, but okay, there's nothing here that we're particularly worried about. Pass it over to the investors. And then we move over to negotiating the financing terms. For clients that are new that I haven't been working with, usually there's a bit of a cleanup. And it's actually it's very fun to take on a new client who hasn't had counsel for a very long time and basically just solve the puzzle. Like you review all of these documents, you have a couple conversations with them about how they've been operating, the history of the business, and you try to basically clean everything up as quickly as you can before being in a position to turn over the data into the investors. Because you want it's not that you're trying to hide things, but it's more like you want to make sure that you are not creating a ton of work for investor counsel that would potentially make them concerned about raising or about making the investment in the company. So once you clear the diligence hurdle, and these things typically happen concurrently, but they're separate buckets. You then go into negotiating the actual financing documents. I won't go through all of them in detail because I think it's probably not the best content, but at a high level, your legal team will negotiate across from the investor's legal team. There's a standard set of documents that basically what you're trading, like at the legal level, the client will negotiate like the economics. The client will say, okay, I want a $100 million valuation, and he says, I want 80. Okay, they want 90. Obviously oversimplifying, but you get the gist. At the legal level, you end up negotiating more on like how much control is the company giving up, and some of the finer points that are not included in the term sheet, which is like the very basic document between client and investor. You basically run through negotiations, usually a couple of like turns of the document where like I'll do my draft. If I'm representing the company counsel usually puts together the documents. I'll pass it over to the investors. The investor lawyers will take a look through, send it to me. We have a couple phone calls. We hash things out. And then we finally have closing day, which is like the best. It's always, closing day is always so fun because the founders, like I went out last night with the founder and his spouse. And his wife was like, yeah, I think you talked to Kevin more than me when you were raising your price round. Like I work so closely with the founders when they're raising that closing day is awesome because it's just, we've gotten to usually like, even if it's a brand new client, we're going to know each other really well by the end of this round because we're going to be on the phone almost every day, whether you like it or not. And you get to the end, it's like you formed like a nice bond with them. And like, it's cool to see them like taking that new capital and be like, all right, I'm ready to go. Like someone believed in my vision and I'm now able to go and execute on it. And to me, it's one of the most rewarding parts of the job, which is like whenever a client closes, I always try to do something with them. And that's often why I'm like I bounce around to a lot of different cities because, hey, Pine closes around. I'd love to go meet you for dinner. It just makes the job more enjoyable versus being the whole like ivory tower lawyer that like I've always grown up not wanting to be.
That was so well said. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you build these really strong relationships with your clients where it goes beyond just like, oh, like he's my lawyer, but it's like you're almost like very good friends with a lot of your clients as well because you worked with them so closely and, you know, you're like spending a lot of time with them even after the deal's been closed. I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the most challenging part of your job?
I think it is balancing balancing expectations of both myself and my clients. I think that I pride myself in, and like you just said, like I build, what you said is correct. Like I try to build close relationships with clients. I do think it helps from a business perspective, but my main motivation there is like, I want to show up to work every day feeling like I love my job. I'm making an impact and I feel better about my work when I know my clients. I feel like there's a personal relationship there. I'm not just like pushing paper for like the third vice president of the Staples department at some like mega corp. So the flip side of that though is if you care a lot about your clients, you care a lot about delivering for them, you can end up putting a ton of pressure on yourself to meet everyone's demands instantly. And it can end up like if you don't without any checks, like it can be pretty bad for you like as a person. So I think the balance or the struggle for me sometimes is like finding the right balance between making sure I'm delivering like a killer client experience, but also not running myself into the ground. Because like I said, I want to be working in this business for 20 years and you can't like, we're all still human, right? Like you can't be running at Redline for 20 years. It's just not going to work out. So I think it's first up, like keeping my own expectations reasonable. And then also with clients, like trying to make sure that you're like adequately telling them like, hey, here's when you can expect me to get you X, Y, and Z. And also trying to make sure that they understand that some things are not always an emergency. Like if I'm in the middle of closing someone's financing round and someone calls me asking about I don't know, like, can I change my company's name to something else? That probably does not need to be done within the next hour. And the like basically like training clients to understand that sometimes like the big financing we worked on for you 2 months ago, someone else is having that moment right now and they need a ton of attention. So it's very much like for me, the biggest challenges are relationship driven because I think I do hold myself to a high standard on that front.
100%. I can very much relate to that. Currently running like a ghostwriting agency. And
Okay.
so very people driven business, right? When you're anything professional services and every client is different, right? They have their own personality and they come from their own unique background. They're running a different type of business. So one thing that I find, and Daniel and I, we both also have management consulting background. I used to work at BCG. He's at Bain.
Small startup companies.
Yeah. Two very small ones. You may have heard of them. One of the big things I think that I continue to learn is just like how to deal effectively with clients.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's something that you've also gotten a lot of reps with over the years.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also like dealing with different client personalities is also kind of an interesting thing because I think that I mean people are all very different, obviously, and it can be on like age. I think is sure that's one important heuristic, and I think like I've really enjoyed getting kind of labeled as like, oh, that's the Gen Z startup lawyer guy. Like, that's cool by me. I love my Gen Z clients. They're wonderful. But they're also like, even amongst the Gen Z clients, that you have very different personality types. And I think that learning to, it's not so much like, oh, I'm putting on a mask to go talk to client A. It's more just, what makes people tick? Like, what do I need to do with my like 45-year-old client that is different than what I would need to do with my 20-year-old client? I think that my ultimate goal is to make sure that they feel heard, supported, and comfortable. And that's going to look like something different for pretty much everyone. So there's really no playbook, and I think for me that's one of the most enjoyable parts is just trying to figure out like how do I get someone to go from at a pitch call like a year ago and first just like I really don't. Am I allowed to curse on this? Yeah, Dad. They're like, I really don't give a fuck about legal today. And so like, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to be super checking with this call. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Later on, like, I ended up becoming a client, and we actually ended up becoming close. But like, there's a challenge there, and like, hey, I need you to listen to me. I need you to be able to like help me help you, and trying to figure out like how to connect with people, like try to break down the stereotypes they might have about lawyers. To me, that's always really fun. And at the end of the day, it means I end up with a client base that I consider different to different levels. Like some people I'm closer with than others, but like I do genuinely feel like I'm friends with a lot of my clients, and that makes going to work every day awesome.
It's so exciting to me because I think in a way I see where your content is going to be going, and you're effectively going to be democratizing what a lot of law is because some of the questions that Matt and I are asking, we don't know because, you know, our perception of law is, in tall skyscrapers with people in suits where we think, we're not smart enough to understand. And the way you're articulating it has me excited about law, which I never even thought I would be. And my dad was a lawyer. I, is there any other big misconceptions that you think you're constantly facing as a lawyer?
I think that there's often this perception. At least like this has been something that's been interesting for me personally over the last year and a half as I started with working with some younger clients. I think that a lot of I have a lot of clients that are like maybe a little bit more controversial, a little bit more fresh. And I think that sometimes I'll start working with a client like that, there's like this concern of like, oh, maybe I can't be fully open with this person. Like this person probably hates me or something like that. I intentionally wanted to work with startups and not with megacorps because I actually like that there's like a personality. I think you're not dealing with a faceless corporation at that point. When you're working with a with a young team that's trying to like really push the boundaries and do things in like an unorthodox way, it's really fun for me too. And like I grew up like I'm like a child of hip hop. Like I grew up, like I said, like in a blue collar family. I enjoy the interactions that are not necessarily always like super formal and I think that sometimes I'm facing a stereotype of like oh, if I meet with this lawyer, he's going to be judging me heading into the call. Actually, it's kind of the opposite. Like I admire the audacity of young people who are starting companies to think and often be right that at 18 you can start a business that's going to raise millions of dollars and hopefully exit for many million more. Like I admire that. I think that's really cool. And I think unfortunately lawyers get a bad rap for being like overly conservative to the point where they're not going to like respect the clients. I think that my job is to be like hyper vigilant about risk for your business. But that doesn't mean that I'm still a person and can enjoy what you're building. And then when we're talking through legal questions, sure, I'm going to put on my really stern, serious hat, and we're going to walk through every issue in as much detail as I need to make sure you're getting proper advice. But that doesn't mean that as an attorney, I don't admire what you're doing or I don't enjoy what you're doing. It's the two can be separated out in my view.
Yeah, that's really cool because I feel like a lot of people and a lot of startup founders probably have this perception that, oh God, like legal, it's just that thing that we need to do because our investors, want us to have that in line, or we need to raise money. So like we have to get a lawyer. And they're not like excited by that because they feel like it'll hold them back. But it sounds like the way that you work with your clients, they don't see it like that. It's you are on board with their vision and you want to enable them to actually get to whatever it is that they're aiming for.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, or at worst, like I'm at least the dentist that has lollipops in the office. Like I'm trying. It's different. I still think sure there are plenty of clients that like I might get along with them great, and like we could go out hiking or snowboarding or whatnot, and we'd have a great time. They still don't necessarily want to talk to me about whatever like random legal thing we have to dig into on that day. But I do try to make the process like as painless as possible.
Shifting gears a little bit to sort of social media.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for just like general advice for founders that want to have an online presence, but are maybe hesitant about potential, legal repercussions or backlash around what they post?
Yeah, I mean, this is a deep rabbit hole. I would say something that I often see younger founders doing on occasion is like the general solicitation thing. I won't get into the specifics of it, but basically like if you go on LinkedIn and basically post like, hey, I'm raising a funding round, like send the calendar invites and whatnot. Like there's an argument to be made that that's like generally soliciting investors, which at a very, very high level for private securities is either something that you cannot do, or if you do that, you need to jump through a bunch of hoops when you're actually onboarding your investors, and your investors will probably be quite unhappy with you. I think it's probably too much of a rabbit hole to go into like a ton of detail on, but I think in general, just not posting about fundraising like after the fact, that's generally fine. But posting like messages that are intended to bring in inbound interest is generally on the riskier side. And I think mostly I kind of just don't know. People just post something like that with no idea that could be a problem. And then later down the line, it actually could end up bubbling up as like a diligence issue, for example.
What is the difference between something like that and then posting about a WeFunder thing or whatever that website is?
GoFundMe.
No, not GoFundMe. WeFunder and there are other platforms like Start Engine's another example. That's what's called crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is basically like really high level. There's a general rule: if you sell securities to investors, you have to register with the SEC. But there are a bunch of exceptions. Like most private startup companies are not registering their stock, like they're not going public. But you will then basically rely on like a wide variety of like exemptions from that requirement. So WeFunder relies on Reg CF, which is I believe regulation crowdfunding, and it basically says like so long as you do like you use a portal and like use a portal like WeFunder and you make like a ton of disclosures, you then can raise from the public. And my understanding there is the advertising rules are significantly more lax than if you're relying on the securities exception that most startups rely on. Like crowdfunding works. In my experience in general, it's like it's not your first choice as a founder because it can be a bit of a pain, and you also just end up raising like $20 from 1,000 people, which can have some downsides from like an administrative perspective. But yeah, it's a good question. It's just like it's a specific exemption from it, or it's a specific securities exemption.
Interesting. On a previous episode, Jason Alvarez Cohen, who's the CEO of YC Company, he told us that he was literally like agreed to a term sheet with Octa Ventures, was about to sign it.
Okay.
And they never sent him the money because of a TikTok he posted on that had like 50 million views, was about, getting a girl's number, was a little bit provocative. And that cost him that round of funding, which was brutal for him at the time. And I think it's an important thing for founders to know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know like the specifics there, but on another like related note, you can't please everyone, right? And I think that what you probably don't want to do as a founder is try to appeal to literally every single person, because then you're boring and you're bland and you blend up. You can't make everyone happy, but you should know who you want to make happy. And I think be intentional about that. I think that if you like in that specific case that we were talking about, like I assume that this person will be able to potentially raise money in from someone else. So really, yes, it's like your audience for like anything that you post. But first off, like internet is forever. And two, if you're not intentional about like the type of people you want to be working around, you may end up like forcing yourself into a corner of like you're basically like forcing yourself to like have a certain group of peers, even though you might not want those people as peers. You see this happen in like politics all the time, right? Where people will start leaning into certain political ideologies, and then next thing you know, like they're ostracized by like every other ideology. They keep going further and further down the rabbit hole. And like, I'd assume that like some of these people are like, oh, I actually don't love where I landed, but there's no way out. Like you just become surrounded by and like branded as the person that is only good for this. And I think like, look, that's an intentional choice. Great. Like you should live your truth. You should fight for what you believe in. You should have like clear personal branding. But I think a branding for the sake of branding is probably like for your long-term development as a person could be problematic, versus if you start from a place of I want to build this business. I'd like my personal brand to be this, and then step back, take your business hat off. Does that align with my personal values? Can I wake up every day as like for me, can I wake up every day as the person who's like known for representing Gen Z startups? For me, hell yeah, I love that. And it's for me, it's not an issue. But I think that sometimes I'll see founders just being like, oh, like I need people to know about me, I need people to care about me, and like, I'll do it at all costs. And I think that could work short term, but it could be painful in the long term.
I think we've got our thumbnail. We interviewed Gen Z's lawyer.
There we go.
So one thing I also wanted to ask you, Kevin, I know you don't post as much on LinkedIn, but you're a user of it. And I'm assuming, you're checking your feed, checking up on what clients are posting, things like that. Is there anything that you wish the company or the CEO of LinkedIn would change about the platform the way that it is right now?
That's interesting. This might be too niche to be relevant, but I find it very difficult to like find old posts. I think that on X, that could be easy, but for LinkedIn, unless, and y'all are the experts, but my understanding is that unless you put stuff as like featured on your profile, you have like your carousel of posts, but you can only see like 2, maybe 3, and they get buried so quickly. I wish that it was easier to create like a more easily viewable, like Instagram. Yeah, exactly. Like where you can, okay, like sure, you can on Instagram look at the big, like a zoomed in or like full screen picture for someone, but you can also do the view where there's like 9 or 10 pictures within the frame. I wish there was something like that for LinkedIn, especially for the way that I use LinkedIn. I think the way I use LinkedIn is probably not all that different from like how most attorneys think about their LinkedIn. Is I want clients or prospective clients to look at my page and think, I can see that person helping me because he helped this company that is similar to me do something similar to what I want to do. But that's, for me, it's like, okay, if I think about my LinkedIn now, like I have a couple of pinned posts from like large financings I did, and I recently made partners. So my clients very kindly submitted like overviews or reviews of me as an attorney. Some of them were pretty funny. I enjoyed them. They were a surprise to me, which is cool. But I pinned those, and those will stay. But any post after like 2 or 3 posts, they'll just go away. And then I think they're pretty difficult to find after that.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's too niche. I actually think that is something that we've also heard from some other guests, that it's hard to go back. If you're posting a lot, say you're posting every single week,
Yeah.
if you want to go back and see what you posted maybe like 6 months ago, it's really, really difficult to get there. You have to scroll all the way down. There's no easy way to quickly view everything over the past couple months that you've posted. So I think that's definitely a feature that someone at LinkedIn, if you're listening to this, you guys should consider building it.
Do you have any questions? Should we get a good idea, bad idea?
Yeah, I think we should switch to good idea, bad idea.
Yeah. So for context, I have 7 ideas here.
Okay.
And I'm going to hit you with each of them. You're going to say if they're a good idea or a bad idea and what.
Okay.
So the first one is not charging hourly as a lawyer. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
It is a good idea if applied correctly. What I mentioned before about how we try to build process around like most common things that come up for startups, we charge flat fee for a lot of those projects. The overall philosophy is like, okay, if we're able to build process, we're able to move quickly. We can pass on more accurate, more efficiently prepared documents to clients. The total cost they'll end up paying will be less than had we been billing hourly and had not sunk thousands of dollars into building a really complex product that churns out correct or close to correct. Then an attorney goes and polishes up documents. So I would say good idea in that situation. I find that where it gets difficult is, if someone sends me a contract, hey, we're negotiating with XYZ firm. We're negotiating with NVIDIA. Okay, awesome. That sounds cool. If I bill you flat fee, I'm either going to grossly end up overcharging you by accident, or I'm going to get absolutely hosed. And the reason is a negotiation could take 10 minutes or a negotiation could take 10 hours. And if it takes 10 hours and I bill for 10 minutes, well, that's a bad outcome for me. And if you would like the law firm to continue to exist, I can't do that too many times. So it is a good idea applied correctly. I would say for us, about half of our matters end up being billed flat fee, but we're very intentional about like fiercely protecting others from being flat fee because it's just too variable and it would be a bad experience for all parties involved.
That makes sense. What about writing contracts in plain English?
I'm falling into a stereotype here, but bad idea. Here's why. I think that plain English often, like if you and I or like the three of us have a conversation about, I don't know, like a sandwich, we'll probably use a bunch of heuristics in that discussion. We're just like, yeah, like you know what I mean, right? I think when you write Hegel stuff in like pure plain English, there's a lot of that going on. It's like, oh well, like I can read it as an attorney and it's like, well, what about it's like this bad situation happens or this edge case occurs. And I think that the like ChatGPT generated legal documents, the underlying philosophy is often like, no, you know what I mean? It's fine. And I've seen a lot of really bad situations actually where clients have come to me from like generally not working with an attorney in the past. I'm like, oh, we have this contract. And you look at it and it's like, oh, this is terribly drafted. It reads nice and simple, but actually instead of spending like the couple $100 that it would have cost to have had an attorney put together like your founder agreement, for example, you have ChatGPT drafted and it looked really plain and simple, but now there's a dispute or there's an issue, and relying on that document actually is going to be quite painful for everyone. So plain English, like there's no reason to overcomplicate things, but I generally like to do the plain English explanations when I'm explaining something to a client. But there's a reason that legal documents are complex, and as much as I would love to have the documents themselves be a little bit easier to read, I want to make sure I'm like the terminal I was like zealously advocating for my clients. And I think if I write a document that is just super chill, laid back, plain English, I would probably be disadvantaging my clients. And despite the fact that I try to not take myself super seriously, I do take my work very, very seriously.
What's your take on using ChatGPT to come up with legal documents or contracts? Good or bad idea?
So I understand why founders do it. And it's not a judgment thing for me. Like I said this before, like I've been a PB&J founder in the past. Like I get it, but it generally like for very small, like non-consequential matters, okay, I guess it's fine. It's not optimal, but like I think startups are doing risk evaluation all day, right? you are basically trying to decide like, okay, I have $1,000 in my bank account. Do I want to hire a law firm to draft like this very, very, very simple contract for, I don't know, like let's say you have an office and you have like the janitor coming in and you have like a cleaning services company. Like, do you want your attorney to review that? Like, okay, I understand. Maybe not that one. You want ChatGPT to draft that? Like, that's not my legal advice. I wouldn't advise a client like, yes, let's see what ChatGPT pulls out and it's going to be perfect. It's almost certainly not. I understand why clients will do it for non-consequential things. I think that for anything serious though, like intellectual property, equity, like major commercial, or really like any like meaningful commercial relationship, I probably would not rely on ChatGPT because the documents, like I think we will get there or closer. We'll get closer to there at some point, but we're not there yet. I've seen ChatGPT draft the documents to create like very expensive legal bills. So in general, I would say the initial cost savings is not worth it, and I would probably stay away from that for anything like meaningful.
This isn't a good or bad idea, but if you could ban one clause founders obsess over, what would it be and why, if there is one?
Got it. So on this, it's not so much a clause, but it's more an industry norm. The generic advice that most like early stage like accelerators and early stage investors will give is, I mean, I've specifically heard of like one specific accelerator who I won't name. I actually respect them tremendously, but they advocate for a 20% stock option pool when you form your company. Now, like very generalized, the stock option pool is an amount of shares that you set aside to give out to future employees. The problem with that is when you raise money on safes, like that we talked about that concept earlier, simple agreement for future equity, basically like an IOU for equity in the future. The way that the safe math works is that if you have a large number of shares in that pool that are not yet allocated to your employees, but they're just sitting aside, like if it was a basketball game, they're on the bench. The founders and everyone who actually holds common stock will end up being diluted a little bit further than have that option pool a bit smaller. So in my view, the correct way to do this is when you're setting up an option pool, you should be asking yourself, what percentage of the company do I need to get from today to my next price round? And you should do it in good faith. But usually founders overshoot even that number. Usually founders overshoot. And look, if there's an overhang of like a percentage point or two, it's not going to have that material of an impact. But if you set up a 20% option pool and then your safe self convert, like it can sometimes lead to a meaningful amount of like dilution for the existing founders that ends up actually benefiting the initial stakeholders. Which, not that you're not trying to like be adversarial to your stakeholders at all, but I think that probably what is unintentionally going on is that maybe a lot of stakeholders just don't realize how large the dilution shift can be there, and it makes more sense to set up the option pool like in a practical matter and not just say, "Oh, I did 20% because my VC told me to."
Is there anything else, Kevin, that we haven't covered yet that you want to touch on?
No, this was a lot of fun. I think that I guess the one general piece of advice that I would give to founders is hopefully your lawyer enjoys like this. This isn't even just me. Hopefully your lawyer enjoys working with you. They love waking up every day and helping you out with what you're building. Just be communicative with your lawyer. I mean, I think my best clients communicate really well with me. They trust me. They tell me everything that's going on with the business, and it makes it much easier for me to serve them. That doesn't apply to just me. This applies to if you're working with any lawyer under the sun. So on behalf of all lawyers, just be communicative. Your lawyer wants to help you, but they need as much information as they can in order to do so. So that's a PSA on behalf of the legal profession.
And where can the people find you if they want to reach out?
Yes. So people can find me on LinkedIn, of course. Maybe you guys can provide a link. Cool.
Yeah, I'll put it in the description.
Yeah. I'm also on X, and you can also find us on mission.law.
One thing we forgot to ask too. Tell us about this running app too.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So this was when I was in law school, and I was training. I was living in Mountain View. My wife was interning at a law firm in Mountain View. I was interning at a firm in Menlo Park. Mountain View, I mean, I guess like the name's right. Like there's a view of the mountains, but it's actually like a pretty flat town itself.
Oh.
And I was training for the San Francisco Marathon, and I wanted to run up hills. And unfortunately, I couldn't really do that there. And the San Francisco Marathon course is like, it's pretty gnarly. There's a lot of elevation gain. I'm like, okay, if I'm not practicing on routes like that, maybe I'm not going to perform as well as I think I am on race day. So I had a really hard time finding hilly places to run. And they're actually, like, as I got to know the neighborhood, because I was only there for a couple months, I got to know the neighborhood and I was like, oh, well, if I go up this street, there's like a big hill that I can run up. But I didn't have an easy way to generate a route that would be in line with the marathon conditions. Obviously, like, you can't change geography. Like, if you live in Kansas, it's flat. That just is what it is. Like, there's not much you can do about that. But you could utilize the geography around you to like simulate race conditions as much as you can. And what the app did was basically it took a scan of your neighborhood or like whatever starting point you wanted. So you could type in, I want to start at the Capital One Cafe or whatnot. And you could plug in parameters. Like ideally, we're doing 100 feet elevation gain per mile. You could type in different surfaces. Now, like in a big city, okay, it's kind of difficult. But I was living in Durham, North Carolina, where I went to law school, and Durham had like all sorts of different terrains. You could filter by like the surface type, the elevation gain. You could plug in the amount of miles that you wanted to run. You can do like different route styles. So you could do like an out and back. You could try to do like a loop, and then we filtered out a lot of roads that were very dangerous to run. Like you don't want to run down the interstate. And then this was a project that had basically no money when I was a law student. So we definitely like, it was a little bit janky, but it worked. And the cool thing was during COVID, we were able to actually host some virtual races. And we would basically have everyone, like the race coordinator would plug in parameters that were like hard coded for each racer. And then we would track everyone's time. We would track like name. We'd have like round leaderboard. And if you were participating in the race, that meant that everyone got to participate on courses that were like at least somewhat similar. And I think like when I look back on it now, it was not like, that was not going to be $1 billion company. That was absolutely not. But what I got out of the experience is I worked with a really cool team. Like I met a bunch of students at Duke who I still talk to all the time. We're in the CS department, and I got to like watch a product get built. I was able to have input on the product. Like I'm not an engineer, but I was able to like work with engineers and start to develop like a very basic understanding of how apps are built. And I think the main takeaway for me though is just empathy. So that was so hard. And I think like maybe a lot of people who have never done that before might have a different view of the startup industry. I think if you leave San Francisco, you leave New York City, you talk to your average person about what they think about startup founders, it's like you'll hear some pretty nasty things. You'll hear a lot of people just think, oh, they're just a bunch of spoiled rich kids that are running around. Like, I don't think that's right. Like, startup founders work their asses off. Like, it's not an easy way to make a living. Actually, the easier path is not to do that. Almost certainly, that's like one of the hardest things that you can choose for yourself. And look, if it works out, yeah, you make a ton of money. But I think from an empathy perspective, having been in their shoes, it does allow me to kind of connect with the clients more. I understand why I get a call sometimes at 10 o'clock on a Friday. People are freaking out over something that like maybe actually isn't all that important for someone who's seen 100 iterations of this, but it makes me empathetic when I jump on the phone with them to be like, hey, I get where you're coming from. This is like your life's work. This is super important, but you can go to sleep and we can talk about this on Monday. It's okay. Or it's like, oh, no, this is an emergency. I'm canceling everything on my calendar. We'll deal with it. But yeah, I think mostly it's just been, it was something that really helped me with client empathy.
Well, my now for mayor, there's 623 precincts in Louisville.
Okay.
And he ran through every single one. He's a big runner. Like,
Okay.
He's ran a bunch of marathons. And, the night before we would run together, he would map out a point route to hit the maximum amount of precincts, like maybe like 6 and 7 miles.
Okay.
And, we wouldn't want to run a big highway. And I could see how, that could have helped in that situation.
Wait, so he was running through all the precincts was he canvassing? Did he like throw on like a QR code on the front and the back?
That would have been awesome if he did, but I did about like half of them.
Oh yeah.
And we would just like, wear a Garmin watch and then had a map that would update from the guard show, where we ran in each one.
That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah, it was fun. It was one of those things that I I had never like I had no baseline for what was normal. I had no idea what I was doing when I started, and like we kind of worked or like it took some time. I think in today's world, actually, it maybe might have been easier to put together, but I think it was really gratifying for me to go from I have this weird idea on a notebook that I wrote in like a Phil's coffee shop in Mountain View, and like it did exist. Was it the best thing ever? Like absolutely not, but it did exist. Something that I thought I was able to be like manifested by people who were like super, super like I got to meet like really smart people that also wanted to help with this. And I totally like if I hadn't had the bug already, I totally had it from that experience because I saw the legal side of it. I saw the product side of it. I'm like, okay, this is fun. I understand why people get very like, addicted to this sort of profession.
The only thing you didn't see was the LinkedIn side of it.
No,
No, not at all. Well, thanks again, Kevin, for coming on.